Episode 1, the term they tried not to explain. Broken arrow is the U.S. military's official term for accidents involving nuclear weapons that result in loss, jettison, non-nuclear detonation, or major damage without triggering nuclear conflict. The phrase appears in declassified Defense Department glossaries, revealing a controlled vocabulary built to manage crises no government wanted citizens to imagine possible. Before the public ever heard it, U.S. nuclear forces documented severe accidents in internal memoranda later released through FOIA, offering rare insight into Cold War operational failures. These archival files confirm at least 32 broken arrow events, each supported by investigative boards or official summaries detailing how close weapons came to catastrophic outcomes. This episode focuses on the earliest well-documented case, the 1950 B-36 crash near British Columbia, considered the first peacetime loss of an aircraft carrying a nuclear device. On 13 February 1950, a B-36B departed Eielson Air Force Base on a simulated strike mission, meant to test long-range Arctic performance during escalating Cold War readiness drills. The aircraft carried a Mark IV nuclear bomb. According to Air Force Safety Center records, the device had its fissile core removed, leaving only the conventional high-explosive assembly. During flight, the bomber encountered severe icing and multiple engine failures, degrading power, lift, and instrumentation as it crossed toward the rough waters of the Pacific coastline. With systems failing, crew members followed protocol and prepared the weapon for safe jettison, ensuring that its high-explosive material would detonate on impact rather than scatter intact. Declassified accident summaries confirm the bomb was released over open ocean, where its conventional explosives detonated exactly as early nuclear weapons safety doctrine predicted. Because the fissile core was not installed, investigators emphasized repeatedly that the device could not produce a nuclear yield, a detail the Atomic Energy Commission later reaffirmed. After jettisoning the bomb, the B-36 continued toward the Canadian coast, but worsening conditions forced surviving crew to bail out into remote areas of British Columbia's rugged terrain. The empty aircraft eventually crashed into a mountainside, where years later large portions of the wreckage were recovered and catalogued in follow-up field investigations. This event became the first officially acknowledged loss of a nuclear-armed bomber, marking a turning point in how the Air Force documented and reported nuclear-related aviation disasters.
Before we continue with this mysterious truth, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment at the end.
Archived AEC correspondence notes that the high-explosive detonation was consistent with the Mark IV's design, intended to prevent salvage or accidental recovery by unauthorized parties. The accident highlighted major challenges of transporting early nuclear weapons, which were large, mechanically complex, and vulnerable to harsh weather, icing, and engine reliability limits. FOIA-released flight logs and survivor statements detail how mechanical failures compounded rapidly, demonstrating how Cold War nuclear capability pushed aircraft beyond safe margins. Investigators found no evidence of fissile material release, yet the incident underscored the recurring risk of handling nuclear devices during long-range missions in extreme climates. The crash catalyzed internal reviews of Arctic route bombers, revealing gaps in engine performance, de-icing systems, and crew survival preparedness during high-risk strategic exercises. Public knowledge of the event remained limited for years. The full context emerged only when Cold War archival documents became available, exposing the scale of early nuclear vulnerabilities. The 1950 B-36 loss stands today as a rigorously documented broken arrow, verified by military reports, AEC communications, and later historical analyses grounded entirely in primary sources. Its legacy is a reminder that the first nuclear close calls were not triggered by enemy attack, but by the fragility of human systems carrying weapons capable of unprecedented destruction. The historical record shows that this accident shaped early nuclear safety doctrine, influencing later policies requiring stricter handling procedures and more robust aircraft reliability standards. Though overshadowed by later, more dramatic incidents, The B-36 case remains foundational, demonstrating how thin the margin often was between routine operations and irreversible disaster. What survives in declassified archives is not speculation but evidence. Maintenance logs, mission orders, accident boards, and official statements building a factual timeline of every step. These documents form the backbone of this series, establishing a verifiable baseline for understanding how nuclear weapons were managed, misplaced, and nearly lost in the early atomic era. Episode 1 concludes with a simple truth preserved in the files. The first broken arrow was not a battlefield emergency, but a training mission that exposed the system's hidden fragilities. Episode 2, Goldsboro, the day the locks failed.
Before we continue with this mysterious truth, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment at the end.
In the early hours of 24 January 1961, a B-52G bomber broke apart over North Carolina, scattering 2 Mark 39 hydrogen bombs into farmland near the town of Goldsboro. Official U.S. Air Force accident summaries confirm the aircraft suffered a catastrophic structural failure after losing fuel, forcing the crew to abandon control during a routine alert mission. As the bomber disintegrated, the 2 thermonuclear weapons detached from the aircraft. One descended by parachute, while the other plunged directly into the soft, waterlogged earth below. Declassified documents from the Sandia National Laboratories reveal that the parachuting bomb went through multiple arming steps, each designed to occur only under deliberate human command. Investigators reported that 3 of the bomb's 4 safety mechanisms activated as if preparing for a wartime drop, a fact later emphasized by the Department of Defense when discussing safety reforms. The device included a barometric switch, a timing mechanism, and an arming rod. Accident investigators found these components registering armed positions due to forces created during the breakup. What prevented a thermonuclear blast was a single low-voltage, ready safe, switch found in the safe position, a detail confirmed in an official 1969 summary released decades later through FOIA. The second bomb, lacking parachute deployment, penetrated deep into the ground, burying its tail section and scattering components that recovery teams documented across a wide debris zone. Excavation teams recovered large parts of the casing, firing circuitry, and high-explosive assemblies, but portions of the secondary stage were left underground when groundwater halted further digging. The U.S. government later purchased the land around the unrecovered section to preserve control of the site, a fact verified through property records and subsequent congressional testimony. A 2013 declassified memorandum written by weapons analyst Parker F. Jones concluded that the parachuting bomb came dangerously close to full detonation, based on redundant safety failure patterns. This memo, sourced directly from official archives, stated that the Mark 39's design offered fewer independent safety barriers than later nuclear weapons, prompting urgent redesigns across the stockpile. The Goldsboro incident became a turning point for nuclear weapon engineering, leading to enhanced electrical safing systems and mechanical interlocks documented in national laboratory design updates. Archival field reports describe how recovery teams maintained strict controls over every component, photographing each discovery to ensure accurate tracing of fissile material custody. These procedures, later standardized, emerged from lessons learned during the operation, which exposed vulnerabilities in crash site security, equipment transport, and public information containment. Despite early attempts to limit public awareness, local residents observed military activity, prompting the Air Force to eventually acknowledge the presence of nuclear weapons at the crash scene. Decades later, declassified Air Force histories confirmed that the event represented one of the most serious broken arrow incidents, consistently cited in official safety reviews. The incident's significance rests not on speculation but on verifiable evidence. Board proceedings, engineering diagrams, photographs, and structured inventories preserved in federal archives. These materials demonstrate how the weapon's internal logic, meant to prevent unauthorized detonation, was pushed to its limits by forces no designers originally anticipated. Contemporary analyses by nuclear policy historians rely on these primary documents, noting that the Goldsboro accident directly influenced later weapons, incorporating stronger environmental sensing devices. Those improvements introduced multi-factor checks requiring specific airborne conditions to be met simultaneously, reducing the probability that accidental forces could simulate combat release profiles. The Goldsboro case also shaped crew training procedures, emphasizing fuel management, fatigue inspection, and heightened awareness of structural stress indicators in long-range bomber operations. Though no nuclear yield occurred, the meticulously recorded details show how a single electrical switch prevented one of the most dangerous accidents in U.S. nuclear weapons history. The event's documentation clarifies that neither political actors nor external threats triggered the near detonation. It was the uncontrolled physics of a failing aircraft interacting with vulnerable design logic. Modern safety doctrine still cites Goldsboro as foundational, demonstrating the need for redundant, environmentally verified safing devices capable of resisting aerodynamic, thermal, and mechanical extremes. The legacy of the incident endures in official risk assessments, which repeatedly use its failure chain to illustrate how unanticipated stresses can bypass otherwise robust engineering safeguards. Goldsboro remains one of the clearest examples of a broken arrow supported exclusively by primary evidence, technical logs, signed board findings, and systematically preserved national security files. The historical record affirms that the near detonation was not exaggeration, but a reconstructed fact drawn from hardware inspection, circuit analysis, and documented arming sequence behavior. As with all episodes in this series, every detail arises from verifiable archives, illustrating how close a thermonuclear device came to fulfilling its design solely because a final safety switch held firm. This accident reshaped nuclear weapons stewardship, reminding policymakers that mechanical complexity alone cannot guarantee control unless paired with rigorous inspection and disciplined operational oversight. By the time the recovery was complete, investigators had assembled hundreds of pages of evidence, forming one of the most comprehensive technical reconstructions of any nuclear weapon accident. Today, that documentation offers unprecedented clarity, showing not only what failed but precisely why, allowing modern analysts to trace the chain of events from airborne fuel loss to ground impact. The Goldsboro files reveal no mythology or speculation. They offer a precise record of the near catastrophe that shadowed American nuclear readiness during the height of Cold War alert operations. In the end, the accident stands as a documented moment when engineering limits, atmospheric conditions, and human emergency responses converge to test the integrity of a thermonuclear device. Its survival as a non-detonating weapon represents not good fortune, but the reliable activation of one final barrier, a safeguard whose importance would shape decades of future weapons design. Through these records, Episode 2 shows how a single event transformed nuclear safety protocols, creating a legacy that continues to inform the engineering and deployment of modern arsenals. What emerges from the archival evidence is a sobering understanding. The world avoided devastation not through certainty, but through one remaining lock that functioned exactly as designed. With the Goldsboro incident documented from multiple primary sources, it remains one of the most studied broken arrows, illustrating the razor-thin line separating controlled arsenals from disaster. The episode concludes with the reminder preserved in official files. In 1961, the difference between a farm field in North Carolina and a thermonuclear explosion depended on a single intact switch. Episode 3 PALOMARES, The Day the Sky Dropped Plutonium. On 17 January 1966, a U.S. Air Force B-52 collided with a KC-135 tanker during mid-air refueling above Palomares, Spain, releasing 4 B-28 thermonuclear weapons. Official Air Force Safety Center investigations confirm the collision occurred due to misaligned approach geometry during routine Strategic Air Command airborne alert operations. The impact caused an immediate fireball that destroyed the KC-135, severely damaged the B-52, and separated all 4 nuclear weapons from the bomber as debris scattered across the coastline. 2 of the bombs underwent non-nuclear high-explosive detonation upon ground impact, dispersing plutonium particles over fields documented in radiological surveys later declassified by the U.S. government. A 3rd bomb landed intact near the village without experiencing detonation, while the 4th fell into the Mediterranean Sea and became the focus of an extensive underwater search effort. Declassified Department of Defense reports detail how radiological monitoring teams mapped contamination through soil sampling, alpha particle detection, and controlled vegetation testing. These surveys confirmed localized plutonium spread, but no nuclear yield, as the B-28's internal safeguards prevented chain reaction even though conventional explosives were triggered by impact forces. Joint U.S.-Spanish operations removed contaminated soil, placing it into sealed barrels transported to the United States for long-term disposal under Atomic Energy Commission oversight. The underwater search for the missing 4th bomb lasted nearly 3 months and involved deep submergence vehicles, surface sonar grids, and coordinated mapping of possible descent trajectories. Technical logs show that the U.S. Navy's Alvin submersible located the device at a depth exceeding 2,500 feet, resting on a steep underwater slope partially concealed by sediment. Recovery teams attached specialized grappling equipment to lift the bomb without triggering mechanical stress, a process documented in detailed engineering notes preserved in naval archives. After retrieval, engineers verified the weapon's firing circuitry had remained unarmed, confirming again that no nuclear chain reaction risk existed despite the violent mid-air separation. Military photographic records show the bomb being hoisted onto the deck of the USS Petrel, marking one of the most carefully documented recoveries of a lost thermonuclear device. The Palomares accident was later cited in congressional testimony as evidence of the risks inherent in continuous airborne alert missions practiced throughout the 1960s. Although the incident involved no nuclear yield, extensive decontamination efforts became an essential reference in shaping later U.S. policy on environmental response to nuclear weapon accidents. Primary source reports from both the United States and Spain confirm that radiation levels were systematically monitored, with thousands of individual measurements logged and archived. These documents describe the protective equipment used, the sampling grid established on farmland, and the series of laboratory analyses performed to quantify alpha-emitting material. The recovery operation led to improvements in crash site security protocols, emphasizing immediate perimeter control and precise tracking of all components associated with nuclear weapons. Records from Sandia National Laboratories note that the accident highlighted vulnerabilities in mid-air refueling procedures, prompting revisions to approach regulations and crew training standards. The incident also influenced weapon design philosophy, reinforcing the need for stronger insensitive high explosives and more robust mechanical safing systems resistant to high-impact shock. These upgrades became central to later nuclear weapon generations, and were validated through controlled testing documented in subsequent laboratory technical bulletins. The Palomares files show how a single collision led to thousands of archived pages describing environmental sampling, component recovery, and verification of unarmed weapon states. Historians analyzing the event rely heavily on these primary documents, noting that the contamination patterns identified in 1966 match reconstruction models preserved in laboratory notebooks. The accident demonstrates how non-nuclear detonations can disperse fissile material without producing a nuclear blast, an outcome extensively studied to refine cleanup procedures. U.S. Air Force decontamination protocols developed from this event remain part of modern emergency response planning, forming a foundation for radiological hazard management doctrine. Eyewitness accounts from villagers, included in Spanish archival materials, describe military teams conducting methodical surveys under strict safety supervision during the cleanup phase. These testimonies are corroborated by photographic evidence showing mapped grids, sealed containers, and protective gear consistent with radiological control standards of the era. The Palomares accident's factual basis rests on FOIA-released documents, AEC memoranda, naval logs, and multinational field reports that jointly reconstruct every stage of the event. The record leaves no room for speculation. The collision, detonations, contamination, search operations, and recovery activities are all documented through preserved primary sources. Environmental monitoring continued for years, with released reports showing soil sample comparisons that verified the decline of detectable contamination over time in treated areas. Although the event is sometimes referenced as a dramatic Cold War moment, its true significance lies in the technical details documenting how a nuclear accident was controlled without yield. The operation demonstrated the complexity of managing high-explosive detonations connected to nuclear devices, revealing the importance of maintaining strict custody even after violent impact. Palomares remains one of the most thoroughly documented Broken Arrow events, with cross-referenced US and Spanish records providing an unusually complete data set for analysis. Through these verified documents, the incident shows how routine missions could rapidly escalate into large-scale recovery operations, requiring multinational coordination. Its lessons continue to shape nuclear weapons safety philosophy, emphasizing engineered survivability, environmental sensing, and accurate classification of weapon states after an accident. Everything known about Palomares comes from preserved technical evidence, engineering diagrams, soil assay results, mission reports, and declassified communications between involved agencies. The accident stands today as a reminder that even without nuclear yield, the consequences of weapon loss can be far-reaching, requiring disciplined technical response and precise documentation. By tracing each step from collision to recovery, Episode 3 reveals how one of the Cold War's most public nuclear accidents unfolded entirely within the boundaries of verified evidence. The legacy of Palomares persists because it shows how dangerous scenarios can emerge not from combat, but from the complex logistics required to keep nuclear forces airborne. As preserved in the archives, the incident remains a primary example of the challenges of maintaining control over thermonuclear weapons amid routine operations that carried hidden risks. Episode 4 THULE, Fire on the Ice. On 21 January 1968, a U.S. Air Force B-52G bomber carrying 4 B-28 thermonuclear weapons crashed near Thule Air Base in Greenland after a cabin fire forced the crew to abandon the aircraft. Declassified Air Force accident summaries confirm the fire began when a seat cushion contacted an electrical heating element, gradually igniting materials in the crew compartment. Under Strategic Air Command Airborne Alert Policy, the aircraft maintained constant patrol routes near Arctic regions, a practice documented extensively in operational records of the era. The fire grew uncontrollable, filling the cockpit with smoke, disabling instruments, and preventing sustained flight, a sequence of events verified in survivor testimonies recorded during the inquiry. When structural integrity deteriorated, the crew bilayed out over frigid terrain, and the bomber crashed into sea ice several miles from Thule Air Base, breaking apart on impact. Official investigative findings state that the high-explosive components of the B-28 weapons detonated upon impact, scattering plutonium-bearing materials across the ice and frozen seawater. No nuclear yield occurred due to internal safeguards and the absence of conditions required for a sustained chain reaction, as reaffirmed in Atomic Energy Commission reports. The crash initiated Operation Crested Ice, a multinational recovery effort involving the United States and Denmark to locate, contain, and remove all contaminated material. Field logs describe how rapidly freezing temperatures complicated recovery, forcing teams to work in protective suits under low visibility, drifting snow, and unstable sea ice conditions. Radiological survey teams established mapped grids, performed alpha detection sweeps, and collected contaminated debris for packaging in shielded containers built specifically for Arctic transport. Archival reports show that large fragments of the weapons' secondary stages were recovered, though the violent breakup led to wide dispersal of components over fragmented ice sheets. Contamination was concentrated in localized zones where high-explosive detonation aerosolized particles, a finding confirmed in laboratory analyses conducted by the Defense Nuclear Agency. More than 500 personnel participated in the operation, a detail documented in official manpower summaries tracking daily progress as the Arctic environment shifted unpredictably. The recovery required melting pits through sea ice, using heated air and mechanical tools to access submerged debris, a method described in engineering briefings preserved in naval archives. Hundreds of tons of ice and snow were collected, sealed in containers, and transported to the United States for controlled disposal, as recorded in AEC waste handling documentation. Declassified communications between U.S. and Danish authorities outline the diplomatic arrangements governing the cleanup, emphasizing environmental protection and data transparency. Photographs from the operation show heavy machinery, snow tractors, and personnel using radiological instruments to detect isolated fragments buried beneath shifting layers of ice. The crash also prompted reviews of airborne alert missions, with Strategic Air Command issuing directives to reassess cockpit fire hazards and evaluate the long-term viability of constant patrols. These directives, referenced in SAC policy memoranda, contributed to the eventual termination of continuous airborne nuclear alert operations later that same year. Weapon design documents highlight how the fuel accident reinforced the need for insensitive high explosives and improved storage configurations to reduce risk during aircraft emergencies. The incident also influenced future emergency response doctrine, demonstrating the necessity of adaptable containment methods capable of operating in extreme climates and unstable terrain. Environmental monitoring continued for years, with Danish and U.S. assessments confirming that contaminated zones diminished after recovery efforts removed the majority of impacted material. Researchers analyzing long-term data rely on these primary documents, cross-referencing soil, sediment, and ice core analyses stored in national laboratory archives. The evidence reveals no nuclear yield, consistent with physical constraints of the devices and safety systems designed to prevent chain reactions under accidental stress conditions. The fuel crash remains one of the most thoroughly recorded Arctic recovery operations, with technical documentation capturing details from ignition source to final disposal of collected material. Its transparency results from multiple nations participating in oversight, each maintaining archival records that corroborate timelines, contamination patterns, and material inventories. According to mission logs, extreme cold repeatedly froze equipment, forcing crews to improvise heating methods to maintain functionality of radiological instruments and protective systems. Despite the conditions, daily progress reports show systematic removal of contaminated debris, aligning with final summaries that documented successful clearance of primary hazard zones. Fuel's legacy shaped environmental policy surrounding nuclear accidents, setting standards for cross-border coordination and the preservation of detailed operational records. Because every step of the mission was documented, historians and engineers can reconstruct the event with exceptional precision, relying solely on verified primary evidence. This extensive documentation distinguishes Thule as a definitive broken arrow, illustrating how environmental extremes amplify the difficulties of nuclear weapon recovery. The incident confirmed that even routine system failures, such as an onboard fire, can escalate into complex operations when nuclear weapons are involved, requiring multidisciplinary expertise. Throughout the process, safety officials emphasized custody control, ensuring each fragment was logged, photographed, and sealed before transport, a practice continued in later protocols. The official record also notes the significant logistical challenge of operating equipment on shifting ice floes, which forced teams to relocate work zones multiple times during the mission. By the end of Operation Crested Ice, thousands of documented measurements, photographs, and engineering reports formed one of the most complete archives for any nuclear accident response. Modern nuclear safety frameworks often cite fuel as a foundational case study, demonstrating the necessity of rapid response, environmental adaptation, and precise technical documentation. Every conclusion drawn from the fuel accident originates from preserved primary sources, ensuring that the historical account remains grounded in verifiable fact rather than speculation. As Episode 4 concludes, the archival evidence shows how an onboard fire in the Arctic sky triggered a landmark recovery mission that reshaped nuclear safety doctrine for generations. Episode 5: The TYBE Bomb, the weapon that never returned. On 5 February 1958, during a night training mission near Savannah, Georgia, a U.S. Air Force B-47 bomber collided with an F-86 fighter, forcing the crew to jettison a Mark 15 thermonuclear weapon. Declassified Air Force accident summaries describe the collision as an unintended contact during formation maneuvering, which caused significant structural damage to the B-47's wing. The crew attempted to maintain control, but with reduced stability and increasing vibration, the pilot received authorization to release the weapon to ensure a safe emergency landing. The Mark 15 bomb was released over the waters near Tybee Island, where it descended into the shallow seabed. No detonation occurred, consistent with documented design safeguards. Early investigative reports indicate the bomb carried conventional high explosives and uranium components, though the presence of a full plutonium core has been widely debated in public discourse. Declassified documents from the Atomic Energy Commission clarify that the Air Force formally reported the weapon as containing a nuclear capsule, though later technical statements remained inconclusive. Official search records from the Navy and Air Force show that multiple vessels, divers, and sonar-equipped aircraft surveyed the area for months without locating the weapon. These primary documents detail systematic grid searches covering thousands of acres, with sonar sweeps producing ambiguous readings due to metallic debris common in coastal waterways. The difficulty of locating the bomb was increased by tidal shifts, sediment movement, and marshland channels that constantly altered the underwater environment during the search period. Reports preserved in national archives confirm the weapon was never recovered, leading to its classification as an unretrieved but non-threatening lost nuclear device. The Air Force determined that the absence of fissile material activation mechanisms ensured no risk of nuclear yield, a conclusion supported in official safety analyses. Environmental monitoring, conducted in subsequent decades, detected no abnormal radiation levels in surrounding waters, findings documented in state and federal survey records. These measurements included sediment sampling, water column analysis, and coastal soil testing, all of which confirmed the continued absence of radiological leakage. The Tybee search became one of the most extensively logged marine recovery attempts, with daily operations summaries detailing weather conditions, equipment use, and instrument readings. Technical teams examined large quantities of metallic objects, including aircraft debris, discarded naval hardware, and natural geological formations that produced false sonar signatures. Archived correspondence shows that investigators considered excavation in selected zones, but unstable sediment and shifting currents made deep digging hazardous and ineffective. The U.S. government eventually concluded the weapon was buried below layers of silt and sand, conditions consistent with hydrodynamic models cited in archived research notes. These models, later reviewed by national laboratories, show that heavy objects released from low altitude in tidal waters can become quickly encased in soft substrate. The Tybee incident influenced later procedures for jettison decisions, highlighting the need for improved tracking, impact point calculation, and post-release communication protocols. Subsequent bomber safety guidelines reference the event when recommending enhanced locator systems and stricter criteria for the emergency release of nuclear devices. The archival record also shows how the incident shaped public information policies, prompting clearer internal guidelines on how to disclose non-recovered weapons to local authorities. Historians analyzing the case emphasize the reliability of primary sources, which include mission logs, sonar charts, AEC memoranda, and geophysical survey documentation. These materials indicate that while the bomb was never retrieved, its safety mechanisms rendered it inert in the context of nuclear yield, a conclusion repeatedly stated in official summaries. The Tybee bomb became one of the most well-documented unrecovered nuclear weapons in U.S. history, serving as a reference case for modern lost weapon classification frameworks. Experts reviewing the records observe that the weapon's burial in thick sediment likely provides long-term isolation, aligning with environmental assessments archived by federal agencies. Although frequently discussed in public conversations, the factual basis of the event relies strictly on preserved documents, none of which suggest a risk of unintentional detonation. The case demonstrates how an accident during a training mission can evolve into a multi-decade environmental monitoring effort grounded entirely in verifiable scientific data. The Tybee operation underscores the complexities of underwater recovery, revealing how even large metallic structures can become undetectable within dynamic coastal ecosystems. Because the weapon remains unrecovered, archival files continue to serve as the definitive source for understanding its status, condition, and environmental implications. The incident's significance lies not in speculation, but in the technical detail preserved across military, scientific, and investigative documents spanning more than 60 years. Researchers examining these records emphasize the importance of distinguishing between nuclear yield risk and conventional high-explosive hazards, both addressed thoroughly in the files. The Tybee bomb stands as a rare broken arrow where the physical weapon has never re-entered custody, yet its safety characteristics are fully documented in primary source analyses. Its story continues to inform modern protocols for maritime search, radiological assessment, and emergency jettison procedures involving nuclear-capable devices. Every aspect of the event, from collision to release, from search operations to environmental monitoring, is preserved in official archives, forming a continuous factual record. As Episode 5 concludes, the Tybee bomb remains a testament to the vulnerability of nuclear weapons during routine operations and the enduring need for meticulous documentation. The archival evidence shows that even an unrecovered device can be fully understood through verified records, allowing its history to be reconstructed without conjecture or embellishment. Its unresolved physical location does not diminish the clarity of its documented characteristics, making Tybee one of the most studied examples of a missing nuclear weapon. In the preserved files, the narrative is consistent. The weapon was lost, not armed, buried, not detonated, documented, not forgotten, its history written entirely in verifiable fact. Episode 6, Damascus, the missile that nearly lit the sky. On 18 September 1980, at the Titan II missile complex near Damascus, Arkansas, a routine maintenance task triggered the most dangerous nuclear missile accident in U.S. history. According to official U.S. Air Force accident reports, a technician accidentally dropped a 9-pound socket inside the silo, puncturing the missile's first-stage fuel tank. The Titan II missile carried a W-53 thermonuclear warhead with a yield of 9 megatons, one of the most powerful weapons ever deployed by the United States. Declassified investigative documents confirm that the dropped socket fell nearly 70 feet before striking the missile's thin-skinned tank, releasing volatile nitrogen tetroxide oxidizer. The missile began leaking rapidly, filling the underground complex with toxic fumes documented in environmental readings recorded by emergency responders. Crew members initiated standard containment procedures, but rising pressure and unstable conditions made re-entry into the silo extremely hazardous, as reflected in emergency team logs. Technical diagrams released through FOIA show how the Titan II's pressurized fuel system was vulnerable to structural damage when impacted by foreign objects. Minutes became critical as fuel vapors concentrated. Archived communications transcripts reveal commanders attempting multiple strategies to prevent an explosion. The W-53 warhead's safety design meant it could not detonate from fire or impact alone, a fact repeatedly emphasized in Sandia National Laboratory's safety assessments. Nonetheless, the presence of such a high-yield device above an increasingly unstable missile created unprecedented urgency, documented in command center voice recordings. Emergency teams re-entered the silo wearing protective suits, but high vapor density and shifting pressure levels forced repeated evacuation, as noted in daily incident logs. At approximately 3:00 a.m. on 19 September, accumulated oxidizer ignited, causing a massive explosion that ejected the 740-ton silo door and destroyed the missile. Declassified photographic evidence shows debris scattered across the complex, including the missile's second stage thrown hundreds of feet by the blast. The W-53 warhead was recovered intact after the explosion. Archival records confirm it landed outside the silo without activating any part of its nuclear detonation sequence. Investigators found no damage to the warhead's internal safing mechanisms, verifying that design redundancies prevented nuclear yield even under extreme mechanical stress. The official Accident Investigation Board produced hundreds of pages of analysis, detailing equipment vulnerabilities, communication delays, and procedural gaps. These findings led to immediate technical recommendations, including improved tool control protocols, anti-drop systems, and stricter maintenance bay equipment handling rules. The Damascus incident also accelerated policy discussions on retiring the Titan II system altogether, debates documented in Air Force modernization memoranda of the early 1980s. Within a few years, Titan II missiles began phased deactivation, with congressional reports confirming Damascus as a significant factor in the decision to end the program. The physical characteristics of the accident were reconstructed using structural analysis, blast mapping diagrams, and testimony from maintenance crews directly involved in the event. These primary records show how a single tool, falling for mere seconds, triggered a series of failures lasting nearly 10 hours and ending with a catastrophic missile explosion. Despite the severity, no nuclear yield occurred, consistent with the physical requirements for detonation and the W-53's multi-layer safety architecture documented in engineering evaluations. The accident revealed vulnerabilities in silo-era maintenance culture and underscored the need for disciplined control of small components that could compromise critical systems. Historical reviews consistently cite Damascus as a case where human error, equipment fragility, and high-energy propellants combined to create a near-catastrophic scenario. Every detail of the event, from the dropped socket to the final blast, exists in preserved documentation, including voice recordings, engineering reports, and photographic archives. Lessons from the accident reshaped nuclear maintenance doctrine, emphasizing safer access panels, tool restraint features, and expanded training on propellant system hazards. Emergency responders' accounts, preserved in official transcripts, describe split-second decision-making under life-threatening conditions as they attempted to stabilize the silo. The explosion killed one airman, an event recorded in casualty reports that became part of the official historical record of the Titan II program. Despite the tragedy, the warhead's safe recovery demonstrated the reliability of nuclear weapon engineering and the effectiveness of redundant internal safing components. The Damascus accident proved that even with robust designs, operational environments can introduce unpredictable failure chains requiring constant oversight and modernization. Scientists reviewing archival data note that pressure buildup in the confined underground space made ignition nearly inevitable once oxidizer concentrations reached critical levels. These analyses underscore the difficulty of controlling hypergolic fuels, which ignite spontaneously upon contact and are documented as significant hazards in missile maintenance. The incident's aftermath included improved ventilation standards, better vapor detection technology, and updated emergency response procedures for confined missile environments. Unlike airborne broken arrows, the Damascus event unfolded inside a hardened facility, offering unprecedented sensor data preserved in technical logs for later study. These preserved measurements allow modern analysts to reconstruct pressure dynamics, ignition sources, and structural shock profiles with exceptional accuracy. The Titan II accident remains one of the most comprehensively documented nuclear missile failures, its evidence base derived entirely from primary declassified records. Historians regard Damascus as a defining moment illustrating the distinction between nuclear warhead safety and missile fuel volatility, both governed by separate engineering principles. Its legacy continues to inform modern missile system design, stressing the critical role of human system integration and strict control of maintenance tools in high-risk environments. Across thousands of preserved pages, the record demonstrates how the absence of a nuclear detonation was due not to chance, but to engineered safeguards performing as intended. Episode 6 concludes with the central lesson documented in the archives. Nuclear weapons may be built with multiple safety layers, but the systems surrounding them remain vulnerable to error. The Damascus accident endures as a factual case study of how routine maintenance, when combined with volatile propellants and enormous destructive potential, can nearly alter history. Through verified documents alone, the full sequence becomes clear. A dropped tool, a leaking missile, an explosion, and a warhead that stayed silent because its safeties held. Final, the archive that never sleeps. The declassified Broken Arrow records show that every nuclear accident emerged from verifiable mechanical failures, human errors, or extreme environments documented with precision. Across continents and oceans, each incident left behind measurable evidence, flight logs, engineering diagrams, sensor readings, revealing how vulnerable complex systems could become. Despite catastrophic conditions, nuclear warheads consistently remain subcritical, their layered safety mechanisms validated through detailed post-accident technical analysis. Recovery teams, engineers, and investigators worked under urgent conditions, producing thousands of archived pages that reconstruct each event without speculation or narrative distortion. The Broken Arrow files prove that the greatest risk came not from conflict, but from operational stress, maintenance hazards, and equipment limits pushed beyond expected tolerances. These documents shaped modern safety doctrine, guiding improvements to weapon design, emergency planning, and environmental monitoring, grounded entirely in confirmed historical evidence. Their enduring lesson is clear. Nuclear safety depends on disciplined engineering, transparent documentation, and continual review informed by the factual record of past failures. As the archives remain open, the warnings they contain persist, reminding future generations that control over nuclear forces is sustained not by chance, but by verified knowledge.